Welcome to our lecture series on Chapter 11, covering material related to Chapter 11 of Kale and Kavanaugh, 2019. And Chapter 11 is Being with Others, Relationships in Young and Middle Adulthood. And the lectures covering this material are broken up into 5 different parts. And part 1 is choosing a mate. So as I said, our lecture on relationships in young and middle adulthood are broken up into 5 parts. Part 1 is choosing a mate. Part 2 is the faces of love. Part 3 is Sternberg's theories of love. Part 4 is the family life cycle. And then finally, part 5 is divorce and remarriage. And we are currently in part 1, choosing a mate. So part 1 is choosing a mate, that all important task of finding the right person that hopefully you will spend the rest of your life with. How do we do it? What factors do we consider? We're going to talk about some evolutionary ideas of how we choose a mate and why we choose the people we choose in this talk. Now, I am going to be posting, so that you'll have this information, I am going to be posting another discussion section, and I'm going to ask you to provide for me the things that you consider men to seek in women, and for women to seek in their mate from the male. I want the top 3 things that you think a man is looking for in a woman, and the top 3 things you think a woman is looking for in a man. And that'll be due on Friday of this coming week as well. So it's an important topic. It's something I believe that we do need to talk about as young people and trying to decide who we're going to spend the rest of our lives with. If we can successfully find somebody we're going to spend the rest of our lives with, who is it that we're likely to find to do that? And how do we make that choice? These are all very important questions, and something that I think psychology, as psychology majors and taking psychology courses, gives you a chance to talk and think about these issues in a little more detail and hopefully in a little more scientific way, although the stuff we're going to be talking about won't necessarily be as much of the scientific scientific study as I might like, but definitely some theory about love and mate selection and why we choose the people we choose. So choosing a mate is an important first step for younger adults. When the individual wants to have a family, they need to find somebody who is willing to have a family with them. And the process is an important process. It will have influence on that individual throughout the rest of his or her life. And we do use a number of factors in making the choice. I'm going to be interested in seeing what you think are the most important factors. We would normally have this sort of discussion in class. I'd break you up into small groups, and then you would talk about this in your small groups. You're going to do that instead in the discussion section on Blackboard for me. So the number of factors that I've got ones here that are listed. One is sort of leading to what we're going to talk about in terms of why we choose the mates that we choose according to an evolutionary theory. The first one is physical attraction that might be used, something that spark, that physical excitement that brings us about, starts to make us think about sex and sexual interactions and possibly having children. Parental aptitude is one that we'll talk about being very important in terms of evolution. And then we'll talk about the fact that often we tend to want a very attractive person, but we end up mating with somebody who's about our own level of attractiveness. So those are some of the factors that we'll talk about in terms of choosing a mate. And researchers feel that women tend to find certain things important in terms of a mate. Um, they don't necessarily focus in, according to researchers, on the physical attraction as much as males do. Uh, Women rate instead important factors such as considerateness, honesty, dependability, kindness, understanding. Those are all things that women will tend to rate as attractive and something they're seeking from a mate. Men, on the other hand, they look for good looks, so physical attractiveness. The research still finds cooking skills to be somewhat important, and then frugality, or making the most of the family's resources, still something that men consider important. Now, some of these things are changing, and that's one of the things we'll talk about again and again in this class, is the fact that indeed certain aspects of men and women and their behaviors, their gender roles and identities are changing, but they have not changed as much as they might need to make men and women more equal to each other. So there's been some vast improvement, but there's still lots of ways in which things still need to change to make for more equality. And so this might be one of those areas where men may need to start thinking about those other things that women consider important as well. So, gender differences do seem to exist. These are things that research continues to find, that men and women are looking for different things when they're looking for a mate. Men tend to be more attracted to younger women. They end up marrying younger women on average. Uh, and men will marry about 2 years later than women because women are marrying older men. Men are marrying younger women. And they also like to have the women to be physically attractive. In a few minutes, we'll talk about some reasons that one particular evolutionary psychologist has proposed for these differences. Women, cross-cultural research again tends to find that women marry somebody who's a little bit older, a little more financially stable, a little less concerned with physical attractiveness. They have to have that spark, that physical attractiveness that makes them want to have children with them, but it's not as important as men. And again, we'll talk about one of the reasons for this, according to an evolutionary psychologist. And Trivers is the researcher who proposed the parental investment theory, uh, originally proposed in a paper in 1972, that it is the amount of energy and time and effort put into raising children that accounts for the differences between the men and women that we've just discussed, in terms of men looking for younger, physically attractive women, women looking for older, financially stable, more sedentary, you might even say, men who are going to be good parents. And the reason that Trivers proposes is because men and women have different investments in bearing and raising children. So Trivers proposes that men and women perceive and seek out different characteristics because of the investment, the differential investments they make in bearing and raising children. Uh, Men can get away with as little as the sperm cell as an investment and walk away from the sexual encounter, leaving his sperm, and then fertilizing an egg, and then the woman goes away and brings that egg to uh, bears that child, and then has the child, then raises the child to adulthood without any further input from the man. So these differences between men and women in terms of the amount of time and energy they invest in children and having and children raising children successfully is what is going to account for the differences that we see in men and women in what they consider attractive for a potential mate. Women make sizable investments in children. They have to bear them in the first place for 9 months, and then they raise them typically and see them out the door to have children of their own. And the male can invest as little as a sperm cell to do that. So men and women are looking, according to Trivers, for different qualities in potential mate. Men are most interested in potential mates who are considered to be good childbearing potential, to have good childbearing potential. So that's physically attractive and somewhat younger. And if they are successful in finding these individuals, these women, one of these women, they may very likely be more likely to produce offspring and to have their genes passed along to the next generation. This is somewhat like the gene theory that has been proposed by another researcher, and who says that the reason that we do most everything is to pass along our genes to the next generation. And so that's what men are looking for, is a woman who's likely to be successfully having children. And physical attractiveness is a big part of that, according to Trivers. Women, on the other hand, according to Trivers, look for a mate capable of supporting them during child rearing. So they want somebody who's going to stay around, who's going to be financially secure, financially well set up, so that they can have someone to help them take care of the child that they bear, and someone who's going to look after that child and the mother of the child more effectively. So they're going to be interested in men who are financially stable, who have good jobs, who have the ability to take care of the children that they bear for them. If they find this, indeed, what has been found to happen is fathers who stay around have daughters in particular who mature a little bit later, and that helps them have more self-esteem, more uh, feelings of self-worth when they are themselves looking to get into sexual relations, more mature when they start doing that. And children invest more in their own children. So the woman who has found a mate who can help her raise the children as well as bear and raise the children will be more likely to have grandchildren and pass along her genes to more than one generation. And according to uh, this particular idea, it's, like I said, similar to what I now remember as the selfish gene theory of, I believe it's Dawkins. And the selfish gene theory means that the whole purpose of almost everything we do is pass along our genes to future generations. And that's exactly what is the final outcome for the woman here, according to this theory as well. She successfully passes along her genes to future generations. We also know that while most everybody wants somebody who is indeed physically attractive. Um, while that's true, many of us will end up marrying somebody who's about the same attractiveness as ourselves. We call this the matching hypothesis. We end up marrying somebody who is matched to us in terms of physical attractiveness. And so physical attractiveness seems to be an important part, and is, everybody knows, is an important part of the mating game. But what tends to happen is we get somebody fairly close to our own attractiveness according to the matching hypothesis. So according to this matching hypothesis, we have our ideal someone very attractive. Reality wins out in the end, however, and we find somebody who is about as attractive as ourselves to end up marrying and having children with. And so the reality is that we tend to find somebody who's fairly similar to our own level of attractiveness. That is the matching hypothesis. Now, that's all that I have for you in terms of mate selection and choosing a mate. This first part of our lecture series. In our second part, we'll start talking about the faces of love, and we'll talk about some of the different types of love, uh, and the type of love that leads to children and marriage. And then we'll get into, in part three, Sternberg's theory of love, and then the family life cycle is part four, and then divorce and remarriage is part five of our lecture series.